20 years without sleep turned CEO Henry Lancaster into a haunted monarch, rich, ruthless, hollow. Specialists failed, temples of glass rose, and midnight pacing carved trenches beneath his eyes. On a lightning-struck night, while staff hid, a new maid, Callista Moore, hummed a lullaby to steady trembling hands. The melody slipped past his armor, softened breath, and, shockingly, closed his eyes. He woke at sunrise, rested, terrified by hope, unaware her song would ignite corporate war, family reckonings, and a love fierce enough to rewrite destiny forever. The Lancaster Manor stood like a monument to sleeplessness, its stone and glass facade catching moonlight at 3:17 in the morning, the exact time Henry Lancaster had memorized over 7,300 nights. The grandfather clock in the main hall chimed its hollow notes, each strike echoing through rooms that had witnessed 2 decades of pacing, of pharmaceutical experiments, of the slow erosion of a man who had everything except rest. Henry moved through the darkness with practiced precision, his bare feet knowing every cold marble tile, every Persian rug's edge, every shadow cast by furniture that cost more than most people's homes. On his mahogany desk lay the detritus of desperation, prescription bottles with names he could recite like poetry. Zolpidem, Esopiclone, Rameltion, each one a failed promise. Beside them, sleep-tracking devices blinked their accusing red lights, recording yet another night of consciousness when the body screamed for oblivion. The wound had opened 20 years ago on a rain-slicked highway outside Boston. Henry had been 22, driving his mother home from her birthday dinner at Le Bernardin, laughing at her impression of the pretentious sommelier, when the 18-wheeler jackknifed, his hands on the wheel. His decision to take Route 9 instead of the interstate, his moment of distraction, adjusting the radio. These details had crystallized into a guilt so profound it locked his nervous system in perpetual alertness. Margaret Lancaster died on impact. Henry walked away without a scratch, carrying instead an invisible injury that no specialist could heal. Dr. Serena Wilfred had tried everything in her arsenal: cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, sleep restriction protocols, biofeedback, meditation apps that promised tranquility through British accented guidance. The head of Lancaster Global's medical team had even arranged for a Tibetan monk to spend 3 weeks at the manor, teaching breathing techniques that worked for everyone except the man who needed them most. By day, Henry commanded boardrooms with the sharp intelligence of the chronically sleep-deprived, hyper-focused, merciless, brilliant in flashes that burned too bright. The Helios Grid acquisition consumed his dawn meetings with CFO Finn Dermott, a renewable energy play worth $12 billion that would either revolutionize Lancaster Global's portfolio or destroy it. Henry's mind dissected financial models, while his body operated on its 20th cup of Colombian dark roast, his 17th year of 4 hours average sleep, his 1,000th morning of concealer, carefully applied by his grooming team to hide the purple shadows that had become permanent residents beneath his gray eyes. Success had a price, and Henry paid it in consciousness, minute by minute, hour by hour, night after endless night. The afternoon Callista Moore arrived at Lancaster Manor. Human Resources presented her with the efficiency of a military operation. She stood in the staff entrance, blonde hair pulled back in a low ponytail that revealed a neck marked by a small scar, a childhood accident, though Henry wouldn't learn this for weeks. Her hands, when she signed the employment contract, moved with the unconscious grace of someone who had once coaxed music from reluctant pianos in practice rooms at the New England Conservatory. That dream had died when her sister Evelyn's heart condition worsened, requiring treatments that consumed savings, scholarships, and eventually, career ambitions. Callista observed the manor's rhythms with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read danger in small signs, the way other staff members avoided the 3rd floor after midnight, the coffee maker that never stopped brewing, the profound silence that wasn't peace but exhaustion held at bay. In the manor's forgotten music room, a Steinway Model D concert grand piano sat beneath a dust cover, its ebony surface reflecting nothing because no one ever lifted the fabric to play. Between the pages of sheet music on the closed lid lay a piece titled Berceuse, a lullaby in F major, that Margaret Lancaster had played for her son when nightmares woke him at age 5. The paper had yellowed, the notes fading like memories held too long in dying hands. Callista noticed it during her first week, while dusting, but didn't touch the keys. She understood boundaries, the invisible lines that kept the employed safe from the complications of caring too much about employers who could dismiss you with a signature. The storm arrived on her 14th night of employment, announcing itself with thunder that shook the manor's 100-year-old windows. Lightning struck the estate's main transformer at 11:23, plunging the fortress into darkness for 90 seconds before the backup generators kicked in. The security system shrieked its confusion, sending staff scattering to their protocols while Henry stood frozen in his study, hands gripping the edge of his desk, as the familiar panic rose the terror that this night would never end. That dawn was a myth. That he would remain suspended in darkness until his heart simply stopped from exhaustion. The sound that escaped him wasn't quite a scream, more a wounded animal's recognition of the trap closing. Callista heard the crash of crystal, the Waterford tumbler that had held Henry's 7th espresso, and moved without thinking toward the sound. She found him in the hallway between the study and the master suite, his 6'3" frame folded in on itself, shoulders shaking with the effort of containing 20 years of sleepless grief. She didn't touch him, she knew better than to breach that boundary, but she began to hum, low and steady, the melody her mother had used when Evelyn's heart struggled with its damaged rhythm, when morphine wasn't enough, when fear threatened to stop the broken organ entirely. The tune was older than memory, passed through generations of women who knew that sometimes sound could do what medicine couldn't. The melody wound through the darkness at 65 beats per minute, matching the rhythm of a resting heart, the tempo of sleep's approach. Henry's hyperventilation slowed first, his shoulders dropping from their position near his ears. Then his hands unclenched, releasing their white-knuckled grip on the doorframe. The humming continued, wordless, but structured, rising and falling like ocean waves at night, like breathing in deep sleep, like the remembered safety of being held by someone who loved you before you knew what loss meant. When Callista saw his eyelids flutter, actually flutter, with the weight of approaching sleep, she stepped backward slowly, still humming, leading him without touch to the leather sofa in the study, where rain now drummed against windows like a percussion accompaniment. 90 minutes later, Henry Lancaster woke to sunlight. Not the gray pre-dawn he usually witnessed, but actual golden morning light streaming through windows he'd forgotten could look warm. His body felt different, not refreshed exactly, but present in a way it hadn't been for 2 decades. The absence of his usual crushing headache was so startling he touched his temples, checking for the familiar tension. On the arm of the sofa, folded with military precision, lay a cream-colored handkerchief with the initials CM embroidered in silver thread, the only evidence that the night's miracle hadn't been another of his exhaustion-induced hallucinations. The security footage revealed everything and nothing. Henry watched himself collapse in the hallway, watched the new maid appear at exactly 11:37, watched her maintain a careful 3-foot distance, while something the audio wasn't clear enough to determine what happened between them. No physical contact, no breach of professional boundaries, just 2 figures in a dark hallway, and then his impossible sleep on the study sofa. He reviewed the footage 17 times, looking for the trick, the explanation that would make sense of a body suddenly remembering how to rest after forgetting for 7,300 nights. Clinton Hayes, Henry's executive assistant and shadow, noticed the change immediately. Where Henry usually arrived at the office at 4:30 in the morning, he appeared at 6. Where 17 cups of coffee usually marked the morning routine, only 3 sat empty on the conference table after the Helios briefing. Clinton had spent 5 years studying Henry's patterns, waiting for the weakness that would create an opening, and now something had shifted. He ordered the Manor's head butler to pull Callista Moore's employment file, her background check, her financial records. Everyone had a price or a secret, and Clinton would find hers before she became a variable he couldn't control. The morning meeting about Helios Grid took an unexpected turn when Henry actually listened to Finn Dermot's concerns about supply chain vulnerabilities in the solar panel manufacturing sector. Instead of his usual rapid-fire dismissal of obstacles, Henry asked follow-up questions, considered alternatives, even smiled. Actually smiled when Vivian Rhodes from Public Relations made a joke about their competitor's failed wind farm initiative. The team exchanged glances, unsure whether to be relieved or concerned. Vivian made a note in her phone. Henry's eyes looked different. Still gray, but like storm clouds with sun behind them instead of just storm. 3 days later, Henry stood in Dr. Serena Wilfred's private office at Mass General, proposing what he called Sleep Protocol H01. His voice carried the measured tone of a man presenting a merger strategy. But his hands betrayed him, drumming against his thigh in a rhythm that matched no music but anxiety. 3 consecutive nights, he said, controlled conditions. 11:30 start time, low amber lighting at 20 lux, room temperature at 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Miss Moore will provide 10 to 12 minutes of vocalization humming specifically, no lyrics. We'll monitor with your best wearable tech, document every REM cycle, every sleep stage transition. Dr. Wilfred, who had seen 7 years of Henry's failed attempts at rest, agreed with the kind of skepticism reserved for miracles that probably wouldn't repeat. The first controlled night produced 70 minutes of N2 sleep light but legitimate. Brainwaves showing the characteristic sleep spindles that had been absent from Henry's EEGs for 2 decades. Callista sat in a chair by the window, humming the same melody with mechanical precision, watching the rain pattern outside, rather than the man whose breathing slowly synchronized with her rhythm. The second night brought in 3 sleep, the deep restoration phase where the body repairs itself, where memories consolidate, where the damage of waking life supposedly heals. By the third night, when 12 minutes of REM sleep appeared on the monitors, those rapid eye movements that accompany dreams, Dr. Wilfred had to excuse herself to verify the equipment wasn't malfunctioning. On that third night, Henry dreamed of his mother for the first time since the accident. Not the blood and glass and rain of his usual nightmares, but Margaret at her piano, playing Berceuse while snow fell outside their old house in Cambridge. She turned to him in the dream, her face whole and smiling, and said words he couldn't quite remember upon waking but that left him with a sensation he'd forgotten existed. The absence of weight in his chest where guilt had made its home for 20 years. Henry tried to pay Callista additional compensation, a consultant's fee, hazard pay. Anything to acknowledge that what she did exceeded the boundaries of household staff duties. She refused with a firmness that surprised them both. "This is my job, Mr. Lancaster. I'm paid to maintain the household. If that includes helping you sleep, it's covered under my current salary." The formality stung more than rejection, but Henry respected it, recognizing the self-protection in her professional distance. Instead, he made an anonymous donation to Boston Children's Hospital's cardiac unit, specifically earmarked for patients with congenital heart defects requiring long-term treatment. He didn't know yet about Evelyn, about the mounting medical bills, about the reason Callista had left the conservatory. He only knew that boundaries, once established, had to be honored. Each night ended with the same ritual. Callista would place the sheet music for Berceuse on the piano's music stand, never playing it, but acknowledging its presence. Henry would place a single white rose beside the keys, not on middle C where it would be too obvious, but on F, the key of the lullaby, the note of attempted peace. Neither spoke of these gestures, but both understood them as the tentative grammar of connection without touch, care without confession. Clinton's first move came during the Lancaster Global Charity Gala for pediatric cancer research. He arranged for Gwen Farah, an ambitious journalist from the Boston Herald known for her gotcha-style exposés, to receive an invitation and a tip. Watch the CEO and his newest employee. Gwen's photographer captured Callista, leaving the manor at 11:47, 15 minutes after Henry's scheduled sleep time, her hair slightly mussed from the humidity, her expression unreadable in the darkness. The photo itself proved nothing, but in the right context, with the right narrative, it could suggest everything. Clinton's second move was more insidious. He compiled a dossier on Henry's sleep schedule, his visits to Dr. Wilfred, the unusual pattern of an employee spending exactly 10 to 12 minutes in the CEO's private quarters each night. He leaked this to 3 gossip blogs simultaneously, ensuring the story would spread like wildfire before Lancaster Global's PR team could contain it. The headline wrote itself, "The Maid Who Tamed a Sleepless Titan." By morning, the internet had done what it does best. Created a narrative from fragments. Callista's conservatory records surfaced, including a photo from her junior year recital where she'd won the Debussy Prize for interpretation. Someone found Evelyn's GoFundMe page from 3 years ago, now inactive, seeking help for her third cardiac surgery. The contrast was irresistible. The billionaire who couldn't sleep, and the fallen musician turned maid who sang him to rest. Memes proliferated. Lancaster Global's stock fluctuated by 3% in pre-market trading. Vivian Rhodes earned her executive salary that day, crafting a response that neither confirmed nor denied, while shifting focus to Henry's innovative approach to executive health management. She deployed phrases like holistic wellness strategies and sound therapy protocols, with the skill of someone who'd once convinced the public that Lancaster Global's chemical spill in the Chesapeake was actually an opportunity for environmental innovation. But even Vivian couldn't stop the personal photos from surfacing. Evelyn in her hospital bed, tubes and wires, making a constellation of medical necessity around a teenager who looked like Callista but softer, more breakable. Henry's reaction came from the same place as all his destructive impulses, fear dressed as protection. He called Callista to his office at 3 in the afternoon, his voice taking on the corporate chill that preceded terminations. "This attention will destroy you," he said, not looking at her but at the city beyond his floor-to-ceiling windows. "The photographers, the investigators, the people who'll offer you money for tell-all stories. I'm removing you from the situation for your own protection. You'll receive 6-month severance and a glowing recommendation." The words came out like contract negotiations. Precise and soulless. What he meant was, "I'm terrified of needing you." What she heard was, "You're disposable." Callista's resignation letter was 3 sentences long, professional to the point of insult. She left the manor that evening, taking nothing but her original suitcase and leaving behind the handkerchief with her initials, now folded on the piano keys. The white roses Henry had placed each night wilted in their absence of witness. The sleeplessness returned like a vengeful ex-lover, immediate and merciless. That first night without Callista's humming, Henry made it to 12:40 before giving up the pretense of trying. By 3:17, always 3:17, he was back in his study, staring at spreadsheets that blurred into meaninglessness. The Helios acquisition talks the next morning turned brutal. Henry, operating on 0 sleep and infinite coffee, made a critical error. He rejected Oliver Kent's partnership proposal with such viciousness that he nearly destroyed the entire deal. Finn had to physically escort him from the boardroom when Henry started shouting about parasites and vultures. His composure shattered like the coffee mug he threw against the wall. Callista found work at Astrid's Corner, a jazz cafe in Cambridge that featured live music from 9 until 2 in the morning. The manager, recognizing her training despite her protests that she didn't perform anymore, offered her 3 slots a week for twice what the manor had paid. She sang standards, "The Way You Look Tonight," "Dream a Little Dream," "Moon River," her voice carrying the same quality that had eased Henry's hypervigilant nervous system into rest. On her 3rd night, she looked up from the piano to find Clinton Hayes at a corner table, recording her performance on his phone, with the satisfied smile of a chess player who just cornered a queen. The breaking point came when Henry discovered the anonymous donation receipts. His accountant, during routine quarterly filing, flagged an unusual charge from Henry's personal charity account. $50,000 to Boston Children's Hospital, specifically designated for patient E. Moore, cardiac unit, long-term care. The initials on the authorization matched Callista's handwriting from her employment documents. She'd redirected his attempt at anonymous support right back to its intended target, refusing even his charity if it came with hidden strings. The realization that she'd known all along, that she'd chosen professional distance over personal gain even while her sister suffered, broke something in Henry that 20 years of insomnia hadn't touched. Dr. Serena provided the ammunition for what came next. Her report on Protocol H01, complete with polysomnographic data, proved that Callista's voice had achieved what no pharmaceutical intervention could: consistent sleep stage progression, parasympathetic nervous system activation, and most remarkably, REM sleep with dream recall. The science was reproducible, documented, and legally defensible. Attorney Leo Bernard prepared a different kind of weapon. Clinton's employment contract violations, including unauthorized surveillance of staff, breach of confidentiality regarding medical information, and conspiracy to commit corporate espionage with Oliver Kent. The confrontation at Astrid's Corner was witnessed by 43 patrons who would later describe it to their friends as like something from a movie, but sadder and more real. Henry arrived at 11:15, soaked from rain he hadn't bothered to avoid, and sat in the back while Callista sang The Nearness of You. When she finished, he approached the piano with the careful movements of someone approaching a spooked animal. His apology wasn't grand or poetic. Henry Lancaster didn't do grand or poetic. Instead, he said, "I pushed you away because I was terrified of needing someone again. My mother was the last person whose presence I required for peace, and losing her broke something I've spent 20 years failing to repair. But you didn't ask to be needed. You just helped. And I turned that into something dangerous when it was actually grace." Callista's response came in the form of conditions, not forgiveness. She would return, but as an independent contractor providing therapeutic sound services. Legal documentation would establish boundaries. Her sister would remain completely shielded from any media attention. Their interaction would be professional, structured. And if feelings developed, she paused here. Looking at Henry's exhausted face, they would proceed slowly, with respect for the power imbalance and the complications of their situation. Henry agreed to everything, would have agreed to anything. But what mattered was that he heard her. She was offering a path forward that honored both their needs and their fears. The shareholders' meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday, ostensibly to approve the Helios acquisition. Clinton and Oliver had orchestrated their coup with precision. Leaked medical records suggesting Henry's judgment was compromised, testimonies from staff about erratic behavior, a narrative that painted him as unstable and dependent on an unqualified woman's presence for basic functioning. They'd calculated everything except the possibility that Henry would fight back with truth instead of lies. The boardroom at Lancaster Global's headquarters could hold 300. Every seat was filled, with media representatives occupying the gallery. Clinton presented his case with the smooth confidence of someone who'd already won. Henry's sleep disorder, his dependency on a maid, the liability this represented for a $12 billion acquisition. Oliver Kent nodded along from the front row, already mentally redecorating Henry's office. Henry's response began with Dr. Wilfred taking the podium. She presented the anonymized sleep data. Baseline readings showing severe chronic insomnia. Intervention results demonstrating improvement. And, most importantly, the medical explanation. Acoustic therapy for sleep disorders, she explained, operates on well-established principles. Specific frequencies can entrain brainwaves, regulate autonomic nervous system function, and facilitate the transition between wake and sleep states. What Miss Moore provided wasn't mysticism or manipulation, it was a therapeutic intervention as legitimate as any pharmaceutical protocol. Leo Bernard followed with surgical precision, presenting evidence of Clinton's conspiracy with Oliver. Encrypted emails discussing the Lancaster situation, financial transfers to Gwen Farah for negative coverage, and most damning, Clinton's attempt to steal proprietary Helios acquisition data for Kent Holdings. The security footage from the manor, showing Callista maintaining professional distance while providing therapeutic assistance, played on screens around the room. No inappropriate contact, no boundary violations. Just a woman humming in darkness. While a broken man finally found rest, Vivian Rhodes delivered the final blow with a presentation titled Leadership, Health, and Corporate Responsibility. She showed Lancaster Global's stock performance during Henry's 20 years of insomnia. Successful but volatile, brilliant but unsustainable. Then she showed the projections for a leader who could actually rest, think clearly, and make decisions without the fog of chronic sleep deprivation. The numbers spoke louder than any personal defense could, but it was Henry's own statement that shifted the room's energy. He stood without notes, his gray eyes clear for the first time in decades, and said, "For 20 years I've run this company on determination and caffeine, building an empire while dying slowly from the inside. I believed suffering was strength, that needing help was weakness. Miss Moore proved me wrong with nothing more than a melody and professional compassion. If that threatens your confidence in my leadership, then you're right to vote me out. But if you believe, as I now do, that acknowledging our humanity makes us stronger, not weaker, then let's discuss the real issue, Clinton Hayes' betrayal and Oliver Kent's attempted hostile takeover." The vote was 217 to 83 in Henry's favor. Clinton was terminated effective immediately, escorted from the building by security, while Oliver Kent retreated to his town car, already on his phone with lawyers. The Helios acquisition proceeded, but with modifications Henry had developed during his brief period of actual rest. Better environmental safeguards, more favorable terms for workers, and a revolutionary profit-sharing structure that would become the model for sustainable energy partnerships. That evening, Henry returned to the manor to find Callista in the music room. The dust cover was off the Steinway for the first time in years, and she sat at the bench, not playing but running her fingers silently over the keys. The sheet music for Berceuse was open on the stand. Henry sat beside her close enough to share the bench but not touching, and asked a question he'd been afraid to voice. "Will you play it? Not for therapy, not for sleep. Just to hear it again?" Her fingers found the opening notes, the F major progression his mother had played a lifetime ago. The melody filled the room, no longer just a treatment but a bridge between loss and recovery. As she played, Henry told her about the dream, about his mother's smile, about forgiveness he'd never thought possible. When the last note faded, he was crying not the desperate tears of exhaustion, but the cleansing grief of someone finally letting go. Evelyn's surgery was scheduled for the following month, funded by what the hospital records would show as an anonymous benefactor. But what Henry and Callista both knew was simply justice. Simply right. The 18-year-old arrived at the manor 2 weeks before the procedure, needing somewhere quiet to prepare. She carried the same musical gene as her sister, but expressed through violin rather than voice. In the evenings, the three of them would gather in the music room, Evelyn playing Brahms, Callista harmonizing on piano, and Henry, finally, impossibly, peacefully asleep on the sofa, no longer needing the music but choosing it anyway. The white roses continued. But now they decorated the dining table where three people shared meals and conversation. The grandfather clock still chimed at 3:17, but Henry slept through it, his body having remembered its forgotten rhythm. Dr. Wilfred published a paper on acoustic intervention for chronic insomnia, carefully anonymizing her famous patient, while establishing a new treatment protocol that would help thousands. Clinton Hayes was indicted on corporate espionage charges, his ambition finally costing more than he could pay. Oliver Kent retreated to focus on his European holdings, the American market suddenly less appealing. On a Thursday evening 6 months later, as autumn painted Massachusetts in fire colors, Henry stood in the music room doorway watching Callista teach Evelyn a particularly difficult passage of Chopin. The surgery had been successful, Evelyn's heart now beating with the steady rhythm it had always deserved. Callista looked up, catching Henry's gaze, and smiled, not the professional smile of an employee or the careful smile of a contractor, but the unguarded smile of someone who had chosen to stay, not from obligation but from desire. "You're not sleeping," she observed, noting the time. "Nearly midnight." "I'm not tired," Henry replied, and for the first time in 20 years it was true. Not the buzzed alertness of insomnia, but the calm wakefulness of someone who knew rest would come when needed. Later, after Evelyn had gone to bed and the manor had settled into its nighttime quiet, Henry and Callista stood on the terrace looking out at the lights of Boston spread below. The boundaries they'd established remained professional respect, careful distance, acknowledged complications, but within those borders, something had grown. Not the desperate need of a man for his savior or the calculated exchange of services for security, but the steady accumulation of shared moments. Morning coffee, where they discussed the news, evening walks, where silence was comfortable, the gradual replacement of Miss Moore with Callista and Mr. Lancaster with Henry. "I dream now," Henry said, apropos of nothing. Not nightmares, not always good dreams, but dreams. "Dr. Wilfred says it's my brain processing 20 years of backlog." "And your mother?" Callista asked, knowing the weight of that particular ghost. "She plays piano in most of them. Sometimes we talk. She never mentions the accident." Henry paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I think she was waiting for me to stop punishing myself before she could rest too." The declaration of feeling didn't come that night, or the next, or even that month. It came quietly, like sleep after decades of insomnia, like healing after chronic wounds, like music returning to rooms that had been silent too long. It came in small gestures. Henry learning to play the bass line of Berceuse so Callista could play the melody. Callista leaving coffee prepared exactly as Henry liked it even on her days off. Evelyn announcing she was applying to the conservatory, her heart strong enough now for the stress of performance. The love that grew between them wasn't the stuff of fairy tales or romance novels. It was built on the strange foundation of witnessed suffering and professional boundaries, of careful respect and gradual trust. Henry never forgot the power imbalance that had begun their relationship, never assumed rights beyond what was freely given. Callista never forgot her worth, never traded her dignity for security. They moved toward each other like two people learning to dance after injuries slowly, carefully, with attention to every step. When they finally kissed, it was in the music room on a Sunday morning while Evelyn was at rehearsal. Sunlight streamed through windows that had watched Henry pace through thousands of sleepless nights. The piano stood witness, its keys holding the memory of Berceuse, of recovery, of the strange journey from insomnia to rest to love. The kiss was brief, tentative, a question more than a statement. The answer came in how they stayed close afterward, foreheads touching, breathing in sync, no longer needing words or even music to find their rhythm. Henry slept that night without assistance, without humming, without anything but the knowledge that somewhere in the manor, Callista was reading while Evelyn practiced violin. The presence was enough, not touching, not watching, just existing in the same space with the promise of tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, each one carrying the possibility of rest and music and connection. The white rose on the piano that evening wasn't placed on F or C but on middle D, the note between the compromise, the harmony that two notes make when played together. Neither Henry nor Callista had placed it there. Evelyn, when asked, simply smiled and said something about music theory and resonance and how some frequencies, when combined, create something larger than their individual sounds. After 20 years, Henry Lancaster slept not because he'd been cured or fixed or saved, but because he'd finally learned to trust. Trust the darkness to end. Trust his body to rest. Trust another person to remain. The miracle wasn't in the sleeping itself, but in the waking afterward. Clear, present, and astonishingly grateful for consciousness when it came partnered with peace. The story of the CEO and the maid who sang him to sleep became legend in certain circles, told differently depending on the teller. Some focused on the medical miracle, the breakthrough in acoustic therapy. Others emphasized the corporate drama, the boardroom coup that failed. But those who knew them, who watched Henry and Callista build their careful, respectful, profound connection, understood the truth was simpler and more complex than any headline could capture. It was a story about two people who helped each other heal not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through consistency, boundaries, and the radical act of showing up, even when staying away would have been easier. In the end, the lullaby that cured 20 years of insomnia wasn't magic. It was just a tune in F major, hummed by a woman who understood suffering, heard by a man ready to release his grip on guilt. The love that followed wasn't predestined or perfect. It was chosen, daily, in small acts of care and respect, in music played and dreams shared and sleep that finally, blessedly, came when called. The last image, the one that lingered after the story ended, was this. A piano in late afternoon light. 3 people around it. A man who'd learned to sleep. A woman who'd remembered how to play. And a girl whose repaired heart kept perfect time. On the music stand, Berceuse waited, no longer needed but kept anyway. A reminder that sometimes the simplest melodies carry the most profound healings. And in the air, almost too faint to hear unless you knew to listen for it, the echo of a hummed lullaby, the sound of peace finally, impossibly found.